زيتونة لا شرقية ولا غربية يكاد زيتها يضيء ولو لم تمسسه نار نور على نور يهدي الله لنوره من يشاء ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس والله بكل شيء عليم في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه يسبح له فيها بالغدو والآصال رجال لا تلهيهم تجارة ولا بيع عن ذكر الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة يخافون يوما تتقلب فيه القلوب والأبصار ليجزيهم الله أحسن ما عملوا ويزيدهم من فضله والله يرزق من يشاء بغير حساب والذين كفروا أعمالهم كسراب بقيعة يحسبه الظمآن ماء حتى إذا جاءه لم يجده شيئا ووجد الله عنده فوفاه حسابه والله سريع الحساب أو كظلمات في بحر اللج يغشاه موج من فوقه سحاب ظلمات بعضها فوق بعض إذا أخرج يده لم يكد يراها ومن لم يجعل الله له نورا فما له من نور ألم تر أن الله يسبح له من في السماوات والأرض والطير صافات كل قد علم صلاته وتسبيحه والله عليم بما يفعلون ولله ملك السماوات والأرض وإلى الله المصير. In the name of Allah, the most kind, the most merciful. Actually, this is one of my favorite ayat of the Quran because the meaning of it is something which it benefits anyone and everyone. It talks about guidance in the form of light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it says, Allahu nuru samawati. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. The parable of his light is like a niche and within it a lamp. The lamp is in glass. The glass, as it were, a brilliant star, lit from a blessed tree, a blessed olive tree, neither of the east, neither of the west. Only in the afternoon, but is exposed to the sun all day long, whose oil would almost glow forth of itself, meaning that the oil itself is illuminated, though no fire touched it. Light upon light, or guidance upon guidance, Allah guides to his light whom he wills, and Allah sets forth parables for mankind, and Allah is the knower of all things. In his houses, meaning in the places of worship of Allah, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered to be raised, to be cleaned and to be honored. In them his name is glorified in the mornings, in the afternoons or in the evenings. Men who neither trade nor sale diverts them from the remembrance of Allah, meaning from their hearts and their tongues, nor diverting them from performing their prayers, nor diverting them from giving their zakat, because they fear a day when hearts and eyes will be overturned. That Allah may reward them according to the best of their deeds, and add even more for them out of His grace. And Allah provides without measure to whomsoever He wills. There's quite a lot more.
That was a nice reflection on the verses as well. And without further ado, the way the format's going to be is that we're going to hear from each of the three guests here about their stories of conversion, about how they came to Islam. And to start off, Brother Jamaal, if you can start. Yeah.
You sure?
Yes,
Thank you.
I was just telling my sister here, so they're in trouble, you're going to be first and then you'll pick from me. Well, for me to stand or seat, everyone, let me know, inshallah. What do you think? Stand or I'm okay like this?
Should we take a vote?
Do you mind if I leave this here? Because my hand
We
is
know
not
you're
really
from
steady
far.
Why are we comfortable?
somehow. But just
Okay, I'll stay here because I think it makes it, it'll set a
Yeah,
precedent for everybody else. Okay, thank you very much. And alhamdulillah, rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulullah. I begin by praising Allah, and I begin by also sending peace and salutation to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here tonight and for inviting me to come along as well. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm the oldest guy on the panel. I'm the oldest one up here tonight, and I come from an era where you guys probably, like when you were, maybe your nursery rhymes might have been different, but as you're here in York University, I come from an era where we used to sing about the grand old Duke of York. Yeah? Anyone ever heard this one before?
Oh, yes.
You had 10,000. Now, is that a true story or not?
It's based on history. Slightly warped.
Right.
Yeah.
So the grand old Duke of York, he had 10,000 men. He marched up to the top of the hill and he marched them down again. When they're up, they're up. When they're down, they're down. When they're neither up or down. No.
They were halfway up or down. I don't know.
So anyway, that's me. That's my story.
They
So
were
anyway,
neither up nor down.
yeah. So next. No,
Don't you dare.
but it is a pleasure to be here, and so obviously we're here to talk about my journey to Islam, and my journey to Islam. It was over quite a long period of time, and I'm one of those, maybe those few people who maybe it took a longer time for me to actually take that step of declaring my faith. But what happened is that I'll start from basically from the beginning. I come from a very musical background, and basically I spent most of my life, even from school, from the secondary school, I was a classical drummer. So when I say classical drummer, I meant like learning how to read music, and I used to play in the school band, and we used to do touring and stuff like this. And when I actually, after I left school, it was the same thing. I stayed in music and I started to travel around quite a bit. And actually at that time of my life, music probably meant more to me than anything else. And being a drummer as well, I was very focused on like natural rhythms. So, you know, if you want, you could say I was quite obsessed with it. So for example, I could be walking down the street and as a drummer, and like each foot that each step I would take, there would be like a beat there, and you know, everything you hear. And there were still some people like that today. And so this is what my life was like. And obviously, I've done classical music, I've done jazz, I've done all the different types of music. Also, I went on to hip hop and things like this. So from the hip hop era, what happened is actually a close friend of mine. He was somebody who if you saw him, you'd think he was mad. He was a nutter, because what he used to do is everywhere he used to walk, he used to sort of fancy himself as like a really good rapper, but he wasn't really, you know. So he used to sort of like always talking about himself, yeah, I'm this, I'm that, whatever. But you know, it was quite funny because it was interesting. He was going around doing things like this and not really focusing on his own life, not really reflecting on his own life, but just, you know, just enjoying himself at that particular time. What happened is one day he came to my house and he had a book with him, and this book was on Black history. So, you know, he said, oh, I'm going to read this book, and he had all these sort of like delusions of grandeur that he was going to become someone great from reading this book. And probably after about a quarter of a page, he sort of like left it at my house and, you know, disappeared. So that led me to sort of open the book and have a look inside. And obviously I find it quite interesting. So obviously you'd be wondering at this time, like, how did that lead to me becoming a Muslim? Well, what happened is, from reading this book and learning about sort of black history and learning about, eventually what happened is it brought me to Malcolm X. And this is a path that many, many people, whether Muslim or not Muslim, they've sort of always come around to this great man in history. So I read his autobiography, and for a split second of my life at that time, I became one of those sort of like staunch activists and like, oh, you know, black power, black power. But then I started to realize, hold on a second, now turn a few more pages, and like Malcolm X is now talking about how when he went to Hajj, you know this great story. He went to Hajj, and when he went to Hajj, he had this perception about white people at that time, but he hated them. He said, oh, all white people from the devil and stuff like this. Then he started to realize he went to Hajj, and that experience that he had when he was praying alongside people of every nationality, this was something where, even for myself, I started to realize that, you know, there was more to it than just, you know, just going through life on a daily basis and having any kind of conception about other people in you know, around you. So Malcolm X that's what happened. So that led me in one direction. Now, this in itself, you must understand, is not going to bring enough for you, because, for example, the way that someone treats you, because at the same time, when I was, even when I was growing up, I had so many Muslim friends and people from school, and there was no one at that time that treated me as well as these people, right? You know, Muslims, and my best friends were Muslim. But that in itself, for some people it's enough. They'll say, look, the way you treated me, I'm so grateful, I want to become a Muslim as well. But what about your actual faith? When are you going to be, to have that iman, that faith, it's very difficult to have that just based on how someone treated you, because you have to have that connection with God, the tawheed, the oneness with God. You have to have that. So at the same time, now the other parallel was that being, again, understanding the beauty of nature. So being one who, you know, goes out and, you know, to reflect. Every Muslim will tell you about the story of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, how before his prophethood, you know, he used to go away in isolation. He used to go and stay up in the mountain, and there he would sort of spend time reflecting. Now, anyone who's ever experienced a countryside, you guys in York, you're on the doorstep of the countryside, right? So you must know what it's like to go out, and, you know, and if you don't know what it's like, if there's any one of you that hasn't been out in the countryside, my days, you're crazy, right? Because this is the most beautiful thing, subhanAllah. But what you'll find, brothers and sisters, is that we spend all of our time, or most of our time, living in cities which we've created, designed and built with our own hands, and we surround ourselves with this, okay, and with a certain arrogance, you know, probably just like termites, you know, obviously within our compound, our confines, everything, this means everything to us. So we build these cities, and we, for example, the only landscapes we know of at that time is like, you know, miles and miles of brick houses and buildings and so on. And when we want to, you know, we want warmth, we'll create warmth from things we buy from the factory. When we want to eat, we'll eat from foods which is produced in factories, but never for a moment thinking that all of those materials, all those raw materials, they were gifts to us from the one who created everything. All these raw materials were gifts to us. So what we've done, arrogantly, is we've taken the materials and we've built a wall. Now, another significant factor is, in York we have a wall, don't we, right? And it's exactly what we do. We build a wall around ourselves, right? And on the outside of these walls we have amazing examples of Allah's creation, right? But within the walls, it's like arrogantly, oh, I built this is what we have. And so what I always did as well at that time, is I used to go out and I used to reflect. And being in the countryside, it is an amazing thing. And you know, when you're out there, you start to realize that the best of design, you know, the examples of that, you will find it out there, you know. And also, some of the nicest people as well you'll find in the countryside. There's such a peaceful state that even, you know, a black Muslim walking through the countryside, right, it could be turning dark. And you'll meet someone along there and he goes, oh, hi there, how you doing? In London, you must be joking, like, hello police, right? But in the countryside, it's absolutely amazing. Seriously, you know, you'll find that people are so warm and there's a state of calm that you have. And this is like being at one with the creation of God. So basically, those two things together now, the story of Malcolm X and my sort of like, you know, going out to the countryside and appreciating that beauty, I started to realize now that, you know, Islam potentially was the religion for me. But I didn't at that time jump to it. I wanted to take my time. I wanted to have full conviction at the time when I would take my Shahada, the declaration of faith. So I started to read up on Islam, and the more I read, the more I wanted to be Muslim, but taking that step was very difficult at that time. So 1 month passed, 2 months passed, 6 months passed, 1 year passed, 2 years actually passed, and in that time I actually started going to the mosque. I even started to learn to pray, but I wasn't a Muslim. I hadn't made that declaration, although inside I was a Muslim, but I didn't make that declaration. Now what happened is my two brother-in-laws at the time, the first one he came, and this is like quite an interesting thing, people kind of usually taken aback by it, because so one brother-in-law, he came and he said, oh, what's that you got there, Jamaal? And I said, oh, it's this book on Islam. I know, what's this thing about Islam then? And I said, oh, and I started to tell him about Islam, and it was like, he was just like, wow, this is for me. And like a couple of days later, he just came back, Assalamu alaikum, I'm Muslim. And it was like, I was just really shocked. And like, he didn't need anything else. And this, by the way, was like 20 years ago. And so if you think that it was just sort of like a wishy-washy decision of his, you know, now, you know, he's never out of the mosque. You know, he knows more Quran than I do. You know, he has full conviction in that decision that he took. A little while later, his younger brother, you know, he came along and he was like, you know, what's going on here? You know, what's this religion? So I started to tell, you know, I said, this is what Islam is all about, right? Straight away with him as well. That's it, bang. He was Muslim. You know, so actually, these two, they were actually brothers of the one who left the book in my house as well. So there was like quite a link and a connection between the three of them. And the first one, he's still not Muslim to this day, but he's the one that kind of, you know, instigated it. But that's what happened. So anyway, I think maybe about 2 weeks after the younger brother-in-law, when he took his Shahada, his declaration, then I decided that it was my time to do it. So that's exactly what happened. I took my Shahada and never looked back. And I know it's probably not good to say this, but my first brother-in-law, so not the older one, but the younger one, when he took his Shahada, it shows a bit of like, I don't know, but that feeling of euphoria that he had. When the declaration was done, the first thing he could think of doing was singing "I Feel Good" by Jane Brown. Right? That's how we felt. So that's what it meant to him. You know, so obviously me being the person that was born in music, as it were, I had to sing that, I had to follow suit. So, you know, that's what we did. So yeah, it was really it was interesting at that time, and it was a decision that I've never looked back on. You know, we had to learn certain things. And if anyone here is interested in Islam or you're thinking about becoming a Muslim, you'll learn certain things. For example, I used to have this thing, as I say, that when I first became Muslim, I thought that, you know, born Muslims didn't like new Muslims very much. And, you know, obviously I was wrong. You know, it was just like, you know, a misunderstanding on my part. But, you know, this is what I thought, because, for example, when I was taught how to pray, I was taught that, for example, we should be like ankle to ankle with our feet in close ranks when we're praying to show that closeness. But no one told me at that time that if you go to some mosques, they don't practice that. So what I would do, you know, this big black guy going into a mosque, right? And I'd put my foot next to the person next to me. And then like, he'd move his foot away and I'd be like, hey, what's going on? So I'd put my foot out again and he'd move his foot on both sides, you know. And this is what it was like, but it was true love with the brotherhood. But it was just like, if you don't have the understanding, you know, you might ask some Muslims now, like, you know, oh, is there racism in Islam? And, you know, yes, in some cases there are, but there are also cases where it's just a misunderstanding. You know, so for example, I used to think that the correct response to Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh was, are you Muslim? Are you Muslim? You sure? Are you Muslim? right? Yes, I'm Muslim. Again, it's just, you know, just that thing, because it was shock at that time, you know, and also, you know, obviously a little bit of too much of a zeal and enthusiasm can lead to someone to actually get a little bit intimidated by you. So, you know, I want to learn now. I've just learned how to you know, to greet in Islam. So I would see someone Muslim walking down the road, and oftentimes it might even be a sister. And there are certain etiquettes when you come to a Muslim sister. You know, you don't run up to her and Assalamu alaikum, and a hand in her face, right? You know, no, you don't do that. You know, so this is something else which I learned as well at that time. But you know, again, over a period of time, you know, you start to realize that everything gels together afterwards, and it's like the way that the Muslims make you feel. It's kind of, it brings you closer to the one who created, because it's that understanding of that the thing that a Muslim does, when he does it or when she does it, they're kind-hearted naturally to begin with, but everything they do, they're doing it for the pleasure of the one who created. So therefore, there's no payback. It's not like I give you something now and I want you to pay me back now. And it's that selflessness in terms of, okay, it's not total selflessness, it's actually selfish, but in a good way. Because we're selfish because we want God's pleasure, so we don't need anything from our neighbours. You know, we don't need anything from our neighbours except for them to, when they have a need, to come and ask. That's the only thing that we have. We have that need where if our neighbour doesn't come to us and say, I need help with this, or can you help me with that, then it's a failing on our part, because our Prophet said that we are responsible for our neighbours, and he says, arba'in, 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 40 each way. So we're in trouble, guys, because if we're walking out and, you know, Ethel or Stan or Bob or Winston, right, if they don't know that they can come to us for help, then we're in trouble, because we're going to be held accountable for that. And, you know, an analogy which is actually a reality that we should look at things is that, you know, in most cities we live in terraced houses, right? Which means that all these houses are connected together. So what that means is, if your neighbour's house is burning down and you choose to just ignore it, then chances are is that fire is going to spread into your own home. And also, the same could be said about if you want to create a fire in your neighbour's house, that it could also come back on yourself. So therefore, we have to always bear in mind that we should, you know, look after our neighbours, and you know, and also in looking after our neighbours, we're looking after ourselves. So essentially, that was my journey to Islam, and it's a journey which is kind of like, it's never ending as well, because there are challenges that we have in this beautiful religion, and those challenges are that the more you learn, the more you realize that you don't know. And many of the great scholars in Islamic history have taught us this. So the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know. So what on earth happens to us that we kind of stop learning? Because when we stop learning, it means that we haven't even you know, touched the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more to learn, and it's a shame, because what happens is when things are going pear-shaped around us, you know, all we have to do is just go to the examples given to us by our great predecessors, and it helps us to smooth out any sort of situations that are arising in modern times. But you know, when we don't have that knowledge, it becomes very, very difficult, and we end up putting ourselves in more trouble than it's worth as well. So I don't know how long I've been speaking for. It seems like it's been for 2 hours. Huh?
It's been a good story.
Yeah, mashallah. But that is my story to Islam, and obviously afterwards I entertain any questions, and you can leave the money on the top afterwards. But I'd like to end by just saying Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk, which is just a way to end any meeting or gathering, meaning my talk. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to one. It's our pleasure that you could be here.
Fantastic to be here.
Thank you for coming, and it was really nice to hear about how, like, you thought of nature as a sign to God, and because oftentimes we do live in cities and nature as a sign to God is completely disregarded. But it was really nice to hear you reflect upon that. And next, Rani, if we could please hear your story, inshallah.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. My name's Rania. I converted to Islam 8 years ago. I'm originally from Northern Ireland, and I grew up through all the violence and everything else that went on at that time. I lost quite a few friends through being shot, blown up, whatever. It was a very traumatic time as like a child, as a teenager, very difficult. Couldn't understand why people were behaving like this. Why did people want to do things like this? It just didn't make sense to me. I grew up in a Christian family, but it was one of those cases where I went to Sunday school and church on Sunday, and the rest of the week you didn't do anything. What do you learn in an hour on a Sunday? Not very much. Afterwards, I grew up, got married, had 2 children, and this was where my journey to Islam really began, because we went on holiday to Turkey, and Turkey just drew me in. I could hear the call to prayer in the morning, I could see the mosques, the people were fantastic. I didn't realise the significance of that at the time. I was back in Turkey I went back maybe 4 or 5 times. Each time I went, I brought some souvenirs back with me. Round about that time, my daughter was starting college, and she was meeting people from all over the place. She brought some Muslim friends back to the home. And one of them said to me when she came in, "Oh, you've got a prayer mat. Are you Muslim?" Huh? I thought, it's a mat. No, it's a prayer mat. I thought, what do I do with this? I didn't have a clue. I also had a friend who was letting out rooms in her house to students, and most of them were Muslim. So when I'd go to her house, I would meet Muslim people. And suddenly, in a short space of time, a lot of Muslims suddenly came into my life. So I'm like thinking, oh. And I got really curious about what's going on, what's happening here. So I made an effort to explore Islam as a way to understand these new people in my life so that they would feel comfortable with me and I would feel comfortable with them. Because a lot of these Muslims didn't speak English very well. So it was quite difficult for them to adapt to being over here. I've always been very open-minded, and I've never been one to blindly follow others without checking facts first. So obviously there's a lot of negative information about Islam out there. I'd seen the media articles. I had watched all the negative stuff. I had heard what people had to say about Muslims. And I thought, I'll find out for myself. Because the people that I was coming into contact with certainly weren't anything like that. I became more and more confused about life in general. Things were happening, everyday things were happening around me, and maybe family were dying and stuff, and I just didn't understand what was going on in this world. I couldn't make sense of it. It was like being in a whirlwind, and I couldn't get out of it because I didn't know what I was supposed to do, where I was supposed to go, who I was supposed to be. I just had no idea. It was like, what's going on? Why am I here? What's the purpose of this? And I needed something to make sense of life for me. I guess it all came to a head when I had a near-death experience. And I suddenly thought, there has to be more to life than this. There has to be. And through research, Islam opened up a whole new meaning of life and death for me. I was intrigued by it. I just couldn't stop reading the Quran. I decided I would contact the mosque. I hadn't even known there was a mosque in York, but I decided I would contact the mosque. And I was put in touch with another convert, and we met for coffee. I asked her about the mosque, and she said I could go along to Friday prayer if I wanted to. And as I observed, remember, I'm going in here knowing nothing about Islam other than what I've read for myself. I didn't know anything about the prayers. I didn't know anything. And in that room, during that prayer, I had this calmness that came over me. It was wonderful, and it wasn't something that I had ever felt before. It just felt so right. So I began to go to the mosque on a regular basis. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd convert to Islam, but the more I learnt, the more life made sense to me. So about a year after attending the mosque, I thought, this is where I belong. I belong in this environment. I have suddenly got an answer to everything, and that answer was Allah. When I took my Shahada, it took me by surprise. It wasn't planned in any way. It was instinctive. It was round about the end of Ramadan, and I'd been invited to dinner with a Muslim family from the mosque. Out of nowhere, I heard myself say, I want to convert. So there was this silence as they all looked at me, and then were like, oh yeah, that's great, we'll help you in any way we can. And I said, no, I want to convert now. So there was this panic to like, what we're going to do, what we're going to do. And I converted there and then. That in itself was a very special experience for me. As I took my Shahada, I felt this heat go through the top of my head and right down through my body. It was like electricity. It was so special. And when the sister came over to like hug me and congratulate me, she went, oh, you're really hot. And that's where it had come from. And it was like nothing I had ever experienced in my life. I just didn't expect it. Then we came to a problem. My family. And friends. What I suddenly discovered was the people I thought who would stand by me didn't. And the people I thought who would have walked away were the ones who stood by me. And that just was a revelation for me. My daughter, because she had Muslim friends and knew a little bit more about Islam, she has been great. The only time she had a problem was at Christmas, because she was buying gifts for the family. What did she do about Mum? So she got round that by bringing me little gifts before Christmas. Like she'd bring me a scarf, or she brought me a little crystal mosque. She was really, really trying. And I just thought, this is just lovely. My son, on the other hand, before I took my Shahada, I was already praying in the spare room in the house. And he was fine with that. Until I took my Shahada. My son hasn't spoken to me from that day, 8 years ago. I have tried, I have done everything. He is not interested. My brother rang me up and said to me, if you become Muslim, I'll never speak to you again. He knows nothing about Islam. He hasn't spoken to me either. That's how bad it was. My father, he sort of went quiet for a while and didn't say anything. Then he came to see me and he sat in the chair and he just looked at me and he said, why? So I explained to him my reasons for converting and whatever. Now, he hasn't found it easy, but he has made an attempt to understand, and we are still very close. The other issue, of course, was food. We can't invite her around, we're having wine. We can't invite her around, we're having pork. So it suddenly became friends as well started to back away because they felt that I wasn't the same person anymore. I was different. They didn't know, but I think that was more of a problem on their side because they were having more of a problem adapting to me being Muslim than I did. So I had to allow for that to a certain extent because it wasn't something I'd seen coming. I also got, you know, the little comments on the side from people. She's been brainwashed. Someone made her become Muslim. What? Right? Because they found it hard to accept. It was my personal choice. I was still the same person they knew. But I was happier. I was more content. I had found Allah. That was where I was. I was happy with Allah. And I knew even though these people were backing away from me, even though my son and my brother refused to speak to me, that Allah would help me through that. Because that was my choice. The outside world were curious about me, still are sometimes. Maybe I'd become a terrorist because I was converted to Islam. I was even told, wearing a head cover, I deserved all I got, which was just crazy. But again, this was about me and my relationship with Allah. It wasn't about these people who didn't understand Islam. Other Muslims, I was expecting me to feel awkward around other Muslims because obviously it was all new. I didn't know what I was doing. Still don't know what I'm doing. But I didn't expect them to feel awkward around me, and yet they did. Because they didn't know how to react to me. Some of them had never met a convert before. So in some ways that actually helped, because we were both feeling the same way. Women, the Muslim women I met, they embraced me as something special. I didn't understand this. I thought, what? So I got lots of invitations to dinner. There was one instant where a Muslim sister said to me, "You can't be Muslim because you're white." And I thought, I'm white? I didn't know I was white. Because to me, colour means nothing. Since then, sisters have continued to tell me that I have made them search for knowledge of Islam. Because I ask questions. Because I wasn't born into Islam, where your family teach you, you do this, do this, do this, do this, but maybe you don't know why. I questioned everything, I still do. Why do I have to say that? Why do I go and do that? Why should I behave like that? So the sisters are actually, in some ways, learning from me because they're going and doing their own research. Men's reaction. A European female Muslim. What? Sometimes my head cover had the opposite effect to its purpose. It drew unwanted attention because Muslim men had a perception, some of them, some countries have a perception of how European women behave and what they're like, and it doesn't fit with Islam. It doesn't fit with the Islamic woman's perception. I had quite a few marriage proposals the first few weeks. Just because I was different, I think. There was one very, from the outside world, there was one very funny, but very endearing thing that happened to me. I go to America from time to time. The first couple of times I went, I used the same taxi driver. He was Muslim. So the first time I went, I wasn't Muslim. And we talked about, he was from Jordan, him and his family. They had moved to America 10 years previous. And he talked to me about Islam in Jordan. And I told him that I was interested in Islam and I was looking into it and whatever. The second time I went back to America, again, I used the same taxi driver. I told him I converted. He was like, you know, this is great, you know, whatever. He rang his mother while we were in the taxi. I was early for my flight home. He rang his mother, who didn't speak a word of English, even though she'd been in America 10 years. His father didn't speak much English either. There were 11 children. They all spoke English. Right. And they lived on a small farm. So he rang her, spoke to her. Then he said to me, my mom never has any friends. She never has any visitors because she doesn't speak English. She can't go out anywhere. Would you like to come and have tea with us? She would love to meet you. Yeah, okay. Probably not a good idea, anyway. So off I went. He took me to the house. I went in. His mother greeted me like she had known me forever. Then she said to me, the eldest daughter was 17. She could speak English really well. So she told me that she was going to interpret what I said and what her mother said so we could have a conversation. The mother brought me out some food, made me sit at this huge big table. As I began to eat the food, I looked up and there were all these faces looking at me. Like this. I'm thinking, uh-oh, I feel a little bit uncomfortable here. Right, but I didn't say anything. They then started to tell me about the farm, how they had a horse, how they had some sheep, how they had goats, and one of the goats had just had little kids. They were 3 weeks old. So I said, oh, I love little goats. Wrong answer. Next thing, I'm still eating my food at the table. This son arrives with 2 goats, one under each arm, and sets them on my lap. So one of them's trying to chew my skirt, the other one's trying to eat my food. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, right? So I eventually managed to get up. And then the daughter said to me, my dad says you can have those goats. Well, all I could think of was, how do I explain to these lovely people, because they were, and they had been really, really nice to me, how do I explain to these people that there are so many reasons why Delta Airlines won't let me take 2 goats on a 9-hour flight back to the UK? So, I mean, they were really, really nice. I did eventually explain, and they did take me to the airport. But it was just totally surreal. But I wouldn't have missed that for the world. Because here were these Muslim people who didn't know me, who were going to give me 2 goats. The next thing I ran into was Islam and culture. I realized quite quickly that Islam and culture sometimes clash. Muslims are people like everyone else. Some do good acts, some do bad acts. And we all make mistakes. Doesn't matter where you're from, whether you're Muslim, Christian, doesn't matter. How our families bring us up and the environment we're brought up in can shape our thoughts and behaviours also. Mistakenly, I thought being a Muslim meant that we were all the same. Muslims did nothing wrong. I was surprised that I'd also fallen into that trap of thinking, you know, having a perception about how I was expected to behave, how like we all did everything exactly the same. But I hadn't allowed for human nature. I hadn't allowed for what Allah gave us. I hadn't allowed for the free choices we could make. As a Muslim woman, I found it refreshing to have structure. It made sense of everything to me. Here was my Creator giving me something that was going to help me live my life. It had all been thought out. Problems became easier to overcome using prayer, the Quran, hadiths, etc. I found decision making easier as well, because if I didn't know, should I do that or should I do that? What does the Quran say? Should I do this or should I do this? What's the hadith say? And it took the guesswork out of it all for me. I actually liked the fact that husbands and wives were allocated roles in the family. But I also quickly realised that there was no reason why those roles couldn't intertwine, why those roles couldn't swap over. It wasn't a controlling relationship in any way. It was to bring peace and harmony to the family. It was to support each other through everything. And that seemed more of an equal partnership to me, rather than arguing about who's going to take the bins out and who's going to make the tea and stuff like that. We all need a role in life, and who better to choose it than our Creator? So just the end, Islam has changed my life. I'm happier, I feel more focused, and finally I feel where I belong. No one made me become Muslim. Allah led me to Islam, and I thank Allah every day for that. Because without Him, I probably would have committed suicide or something, because the pressures was just too much. So I just want to thank Rasha for inviting me. No, they are. And I want to thank you as well.
Thank you for coming.
And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, Sister Ania, for speaking. That was a really heartwarming story, something that genuinely touched me. And I'm not just saying that because I'm part of the Islamic Society, that genuinely touched me a lot.
You haven't got any goats, have you?
Unfortunately, no. And I think one of the really important things to focus on is when Sister Ania said it's not about just taking what you see in the news, but it's actually about going and doing your own research to see what's actually out there. And just like the strength that you had to like have problems arising with your family, but just hold on to the rope of God so tightly, that's something inspiring to me, and that inspires me so much. And last but definitely not least, Brother Yusuf, if you could tell us about your story.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان من ما لم يعلم. Thank you. Just to start with my background, I'm from Portugal. I was born in the 90s. I have one sister and one brother, both older. When I was still a young baby, I was baptized as a Christian, probably Catholic, because it's a Catholic country. My grandma was a Jehovah's Witness, and we used to, on holidays, winter and summer holidays, we used to go to her place, and she used to take us to these Jehovah's Witness gatherings. So I had, since the very beginning, some close contact with the Bible and she had as well a book of biblical stories. And we used to work on a land with olive trees, so I had a close contact as well with the countryside life. I loved science and sports as well, of course. In construction sites, I used to open my mouth just looking at construction sites and seeing these huge machines working the land, and I used to play with my arm like this. Besides cartoons, I used to stay on Saturday morning watching telly, seeing BBC Wildlife, which is something that I really enjoy. I did practice a lot of sport, swimming, running, roller hockey. Actually, I practiced roller hockey for 10 years. And I liked philosophy as well. And I always have been interested, intellectual issues. I always remember my father sitting on the couch, complaining about news and what the politicians were saying. When I was 10 years old, my parents got divorced, and it was quite a troubling time, because besides all the normal issues of puberty and growing up, the same as the sister Reina, the questions why, the whys start coming up. And Black Eyed Peas said, Father, send us some guidance from above, because people got me questioning where is the love. And I started looking, and why people have so much prejudice and so much preconceptions about the color of our skin. My mom was half African, she was from Angola, and my grandma from her side was as the color of this brother. And for me it was just a woman who had black skin. I had no preconceptions made about the skin. And I always had white friends. I used to go to their houses and play with them. And then, for example, just to change, why a football player makes more money than a professor, teacher, or a doctor, or an engineer? In 2000 or 2001, I was 10. 9/11 happened, and the only thing I remember about Arabs or Muslims was my father saying that they rather live standing or die standing, actually. They rather die standing than live on their knees. And that's the only thing from that time I remember. I used to see a program called, in Portuguese, Toda a Verdade, which means all truth. It was a program that analyzed some issues of society. And I remember from philosophy classes studying, I don't know his name, I don't remember, but it was the guy who said, I think so I exist. And he came to this conclusion with the doubt. So I started doubting everything, because he really marked me. And when I was around 15, 16, I saw a movie called V for Vendetta, or V for Vengeance. And the main character said some profounding, for me, statements like, there is no coincidence, only an illusion of coincidence. And he said as well, I, like God, do not play with dice and do not believe in coincidences. The event that I would call the trigger or the Pandora's box was when my sister, my older sister, she was living here in England a long time. She shared with me a documentary called Dear Rivals, made by two Muslim brothers, which I would describe as an unofficial and mind-blowing version of history, which led me to a wide search, which led me to other documentaries such as Zeitgeist, Ancient Knowledge. This is all titles of documentaries. Expelled, Intelligence Not Allowed, and this one I know it is made by Ben Stein, if anyone knows. And two others called The Zionist Matrix of Power and Israel, Promised Land for Organized Crime by David Duke. I came across personalities. I'm not expert in nothing, but I came across people like Mr. President Kennedy, JFK, and his amazing speech, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and some of his controversial statements, Hitler, everybody knows, in what conditions Princess Diana died, Malcolm X, and you cannot escape from it. Mahatma Gandhi, Bob Marley, and Bob Marley because one day he was shot down, and 2 days later he stand up on the stage to sing, and people asked him, why you were almost killed, why you were here? And he said, the people who are trying to make this world bad, they are not taking a day off. How can I? Mr. Tupac Shakur, besides all of his background, Aleister Crowley, if nobody knows, he was considered the wickedest man of... Sorry? Well, it was a lot of stuff. And Albert Pike, I don't know if people know, Albert Pike was a great intellect. He dominated 16 languages, but he was also one of the founders, or he led to the foundation of the Ku Klux Klan. And you know, he was involved in Freemasonry and stuff like that. And I searched subjects such as ancient to modern history, Sumerians and Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, but just as a subject I never, took any positions. Kabbalah, Freemasonry and the Illuminati group, and the Jesuits, which are like the guardians of the Pope. Documents such as Protocols of Zion, or the Elders of Zion. I checked the world wars, why they started, why they ended. And again I came back to 9/11. And how Hollywood works, the fictional aliens or extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional, terrorism, chemtrails, Monsanto Company, which is a chemical company that is involved in biotechnology, and Codex Alimentarius, which is a trade commission that regulates food trade, and a lot of countries are in this food trade. Eugenics, which was used by Hitler and his ethnic cleansing, psychiatry, and I discovered psychiatry has no scientific base whatsoever. Agenda 21, and one of my favorite subjects, which is High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAR. Cymatics, and this is an amazing subject, which is sound, experiences with sound on matter, which create the sacred geometry, and the intelligent design, which basically is defying Darwinism today as the process of evolution, you can call it like that, which says there is a mind behind the existence of the universe. Actually, matter is consciousness. The matrix of all matter is consciousness, mind. That's what they say. As I was searching all these documents, and believe me, there's not even half what I've seen, what I've researched, I start realizing that I had to make a decision, because the world that I knew was gone. There's no turning back after you start checking this stuff. So after I realized that there's a lot behind the shadows or the curtain or the hijab, I realized why that, for example, some Muslim youth come from their countries wanting to drink Coca-Cola and going to McDonald's, and they arrive in America and everybody doesn't like them, and they start wondering why. When they just promote peace and love and brotherhood. And after I read the Quran, the meaning of Quran, because I don't know how to read Arabic, I came across verses like the one I recited in the beginning, and the one in Surah Al-Baqarah, I think is 256, which says there is no compulsion in religion, and truth stands out clear from falsehood. And so on the 28th of March of 2012, by the hand of the Sheikh Abdul Rahman, our local Imam, I declare my faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I would just like to finish with one of the first things I learned. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Yusuf, for your talk. Like, as much as conversion is a matter of the heart, like, it was really nice to hear Yusuf talk about how there was logical reasoning in his conversion to Islam. It wasn't just a haphazard decision. He did think about it logically, and that was something really refreshing to hear. And now the floor is open to any question and answers for our three guests today. Yep, Sheikh Khalid.
I think yesterday you said it takes one person to start, and that took quite some time to start from 100 straight.
Thank you.
No question. Jamaal, I just want to say thank you very much. It was actually really beautiful to see three people from completely different backgrounds speaking about their own personal journey, which were completely different, but leading to one thing which has led us all to be here today. And something that I firmly believe in and I advocate and I speak about a lot is the fact that whether you're born a Muslim or you find out about Islam later on in life, or you don't even know anything about Islam, there comes a time in your life when we all convert, if you like, or revert back to Islam. Myself included, was born in a Muslim family. And I think if anybody's not thinking about that, thinking we're born in a Muslim family, that's it, we're Muslim, I don't think you should think like that. I think you should try and search for a time in your life, or a time that you may be looking towards, where you will actually consciously say, Shadu an la ilaha illallah wa shadu anna Muhammadan Rasul, meaning consciously declare the Shahada. But if I could ask maybe a short answer from each of you, as some advice to people who maybe are brought up in a Muslim family, but they are longing for that kind of sweetness of the faith, halawat al-iman, as you have described, that sweetness of faith that you felt. I mean, yours was talking about electrifying kind of feeling. Brother Yusuf, alhamdulillah, I can say I'm very proud of you for being on stage and speaking about your story, because like you said, we've been through a little journey ourselves, but yours was more of a research thing, made sense, and that's it. And in the middle, inshallah, yours was completely different as well, looking at your background. So what advice would you give to people who are born in Muslim families, brought up as Muslims, but are looking for that sweetness of the faith which sometimes is lacking?
Shall I start?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, bismillah. I think that's a really good question, mashallah, because what I found is there's a relation between those who are born Muslims and those who revert or convert to Islam. And it's a beautiful cycle, actually. So many times you have revert stories, as with tonight, for example. I present a show on TV, and in that show I actually had a program where we called it the journey home, because exactly what you're saying, and if you're born within any kind of environment, so for example Islam, you may not get to taste that sweetness of faith, because just as you know, any background, for example, as you're growing up, you're just mimicking the actions of what you've been taught, not realizing exactly how sweet it is, the thing that you have. But then what happens is you'll see people coming into that religion, and when you see that happening, you're thinking, well, why are you doing that? I'm running away from the mosque, and you're running to the mosque. And then at that point, you start to realize that, you know, wow, this is what I have, is something powerful. So then we learn off of each other. You know, we encourage each other, and it's really beautiful, mashallah.
I agree with what you're saying. What I would say is, like I said during my talk, some people who are born as Muslims into Islam as Muslims are taught things from their families that aren't necessarily Islamically correct. And unfortunately that gets passed on then to the next generation. What I would say is, do your own research, whether you're a convert, a revert, or you have been born into an Islamic family. Try and separate all the old wives' tales you've been told from the actual religion. Try and separate the culture from the religion, because we do all react to our environment, and that's really, really important to actually feel the strength of Islam in its raw form, not mix it up with everything else. That's it.
Well, basically my journey was just research, because I never talked to nobody. You know, Portugal is not the center of Islam. And the information I was seeing before my eyes was, I became petrified, because it scared me. Because am I the only one looking like this? What shall I do? And I never spoke to no one, because I knew it straight away. You nuts, you crackhead. And I think the most important thing was that I dealt with it exactly like a scientist. There is data and there is proof. There's the connection with reality, and it's up to you to do to decide, will you take it as truth and use it in your life, or you're just going to ignore it? It was the kind of information you cannot ignore and you cannot forget. Because when you look around outside, you'll see media, you'll see wars, you see taxes, you see everything, and you see the lies. And one of the most profound things that took me to Islam was the knowledge behind the verses of Quran. Quran was a miracle of words. That was the only miracle that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ associated with himself. And if it is the last revelation, it has to be a miracle in this age as well. And if we are in the age of knowledge, it is the miracle of knowledge. And if you look into the work of Dr. Zaid Ghazawi, he extracts verses from the Quran and applies them in engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, whatever field. After applying to the subjects, he extracts principles of those subjects, and if you see his videos, he says that he made a PhD from the Quran. He made his PhD in biomedical engineering from the Quran. And the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the golden age of Islam made me realize that this is the way how people should behave. This is the way how people should lead their lives. Because if there is no God, if you don't believe in the unseen world, you're excluding a big part of the life of the world. Because, you know, there's UV and there's infrared, and you only see in between, and this is a small gap. So what about the UV, UA, UV, gamma rays, and you know, infrared, radio waves, microwaves? You don't see this stuff. So there's a lot going on, here that we don't see. And I had to submit. I had no choice. Even though, regardless of what other people think, I made my choice and I submitted. That was the main thing that gave me strength to convert.
Yeah.
Jazakallah for all the speakers that have taken the time out to share their stories. As you can see, the shiny red banner, the banner for the National Zakat Foundation, which I'm privileged to be a part of. And one type of people that we look after are new Muslims who enter the faith. New Muslims who, for various reasons, they come into a situation where, through either a lack of a support system and circumstance, come to a situation where they're in need. Can each of you give instances where you've had support and how it's aided you in your journey to where you are now, and perhaps some instances where you perhaps felt isolated as well, because both are needed to be understood for us Muslims to help future converts, reverts to come to the religion so that we can properly look after them. Very often it's a case of the shahada with the halwa and the sweets and the hugs and the kisses, but then very often they're forgotten about. So if you could share some of the experiences, that would be good.
Could you repeat the question, please? Sorry, if that's a possibility.
I was asking about instances of.
Repeat the question.
Ask again.
If you could share your experiences in your path as in your journey to being a Muslim, and more importantly, after you took your took your shahada, which is certification of faith, and the challenges you faced. For example, friends that you had, relatives, etc., that aided you or hindered you in your journey.
I think what the brother's asking is like, have there been times in your journey where you've had the support and how that's helped you? And then have there also been times in your journey where you've lacked the support and how that's affected you as well?
I found a lot of support from the Muslims in the mosque. A lot, and I still do have a lot of support from them. Not just when I'm at the mosque, but also outside of the mosque. And that has really helped a lot. And like I said, that has sort of worked both ways, because they're actually feeding off me to a certain extent as well. And it's making them aware of their actions too. I have to say, the only time that I felt a little bit overwhelmed was at a class at the mosque for Arabic and Quran, and I just felt I was totally out of my depth, so I didn't go. Because I just couldn't. I actually felt quite a lot of pressure to suddenly learn everything, and I tried so hard in the beginning, probably too hard, to the point where I had to step back and think, okay, hang on a minute, Islam's supposed to be easy, you're not making things easy for yourself. And that actually made a big difference, because then I began to take things slower, and I only took on what I knew I could cope with. So that's sort of like the two incidents that I've had.
Alhamdulillah, when I became Muslim, I think the community that I was in at the time was quite, it was okay. I was one of the fortunate ones, but your question, mashallah, it came, and your comment, it came at a very good time, because around us we are finding that there are many new Muslims that they come into the deen, but they don't have the support that they're meant to have. Now, Imam Sab over there, when you mentioned about, for example, the people who are born in Islam, the community is there. The new Muslim comes along and is not being sort of supported all the time from that community. Now, because as I mentioned from your question, that there's a way where we could help each other in terms of the deen and also from community support. But when it doesn't happen, what we find is there are many Muslims who, when they come into the deen of Islam, they will spend their first Ramadan at home. They will spend Christmas and other holidays at home on their own. And they feel isolated, and they feel that they may have made a bad choice of coming to the deen of Islam. Their faith in Allah is strong, but they feel that maybe I didn't do the right thing at this time. And that's why I have to say that there are organizations such as National Zakat Foundation that wasn't around when I became Muslim, that these kind of organizations, we need to, as Muslims, give them our full support, because the things that we may not feel comfortable doing, for example, maybe we see a Muslim that's going to spend time on their own and they may not have any money, we might not feel comfortable bringing them into our own home. But because we have organizations like this that will do, help these new Muslims, we should be supporting them. But, I myself, I was probably more fortunate. I didn't have that situation where I was spending time on my own, but I see it all the time. So, may Allah reward all of you brothers and, grant you success in what you're doing. Amen.
Can I just say something as well? I totally get what you're saying. However, it's also important that the new Muslim makes the effort too.
Yeah. It
can't just be one way. You can't sit back and expect people to invite you to their homes to. That's just not normal. You need to mix in with the Muslims who are there. You need to learn from them as well. You need to invite them for coffee, and that way the bond is built. So it sort of has to work both ways.
Well, just to add something, that when I arrived to the mosque and I said, oh, I want to make my shahada. I was so convicted on what I was doing that some people thought, no, this is a spy. Because I'm from Portugal and there's nothing. There's no nothing. But the best support ever was from God Himself. Because otherwise there was no chance I could get from my own self to Islam. And being a man of science, God showed me a man which is, I don't know, probably close to electronics and physics here. You might know which was Nikola Tesla. And he was a genius, I would say. Because I had the dream of building a house, self-sufficient house with self-sufficient machines, you know, free energy for everyone, peace, no more fighting. I said, you know, youth wishes. And basically it was just God who supported me and guided me, showed you should see this and see that, and one thing led me to another. But when I decided that I wanted to be Muslim, then I saw the support all around me, because I had the will. And I came to the conclusion that you do half of the work and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do the other half. I had no home. I was sleeping in hotel rooms, because when I came to England it was not so easy in the beginning, and I was not praying but wishing, oh Ya Allah, Ya, help me and my family. And He helped me and my family, and we got the house and I got a job, and as well I basically owe where I am today to the mosque and to the community, because they fully helped me, fully supported me. And if I don't know more about Islam today, it's because I don't want, or I don't have time, or I don't make time. And basically we should support, but we should look for support. This is both ways. And evolution is based on cooperation, not competition. This is the Darwinist way. This is important because it affects us in so many ways. It's the fundamentals of our mindset, of our state. They separated church from the state, and with that they took away the values, the high standard values of character that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ brought. He said himself that he came to perfect good character and bring God to our lives. And God is the Al-Hayyul Qayyum. He sustains, He supports. That's all.
Thankfully, we're getting really, really good answers, and I think Professor Gamati's got a question and a few people in the back, so hopefully we want to get quite a few questions answered, inshallah. So Professor Gamati, if you want to go ahead.
I was hoping that more of the students would ask a question, but I mean, from where I sit, I see young people, young like Brother Jamaal.
Oh yes, of course.
Favoritism.
No, this is a serious point. And actually, it's at this time, this day and age, it's not the best time for Muslims. And I feel for the young people who have so much pressure from the society around them for the atrocities that have been committed in the name of Muslims. and I can feel for the sisters who are going outside, and perhaps York is not a violent city like some other cities which have seen young people really being pressurized. The scarf is a very simple and easy to recognize people with. The beard, unfortunately, is another one, particularly if people start wearing the jilbab, which is not perhaps compatible with the weather in here, to say the least. But again, it's a target. How could you reassure these young people who have a lot of pressure? You have gone through a difficult journey yourselves, but now I think we both have that journey together. How can you help young people and say to them, with practical example rather than hold to the rope of Allah and you will be all right? Because at the end of the day, they are outside there, and they can see it also from people within an institution like a university, where you think that people are intelligent and more objective and more above it. Far from it, sometimes. And I know that without being able to say in words what I say, without being in court fighting. But I'm willing to go to court. People know that about me. But if you can share some of that experience and help people, which I was hoping that they would come and say to you, I have a problem. And I think unless we come out and say, well, I have a problem, it's not the end of the world, but I seek help. You can seek help from Allah, and we all do that. But I think Allah also wants us to help each other. So if you can reflect and say that would be very good. Thank you.
The one thing I would say is, obviously, as a new Muslim woman, there are a few changes to make. I was very aware, I felt strange going out. I was aware people were looking at me. The way I got round that in the beginning was to go out with another sister, because then the focus wasn't just on me, and I felt more secure because there was another sister with me who was dressed the same way. And gradually over time then that changed, and I was able, you know, to go out on my own. I felt confident enough to go out on my own. These days, I tend to, you do get comments, you do get snide comments. And to be quite honest with you, I just smile to myself and I think, you have no idea. Because the outward appearance of a Muslim woman isn't what's inside. And these people are saying, the headscarf. Oh, she's wearing a headscarf. The headscarf does not make me who I am. Worshipping Allah makes me who I am. And if other people don't see that or don't understand that, that's our problem.
Okay, well, to answer that question, I think it's very important that, especially, you know, of any age, any Muslim, whether you were born Muslim or whether you just come into the religion of Islam, is for you to know exactly what it is that you have, to know exactly how precious this jewel is that you have. Because if you wear the hijab or you wear the beard because that's what Muslims do, then whenever something does happen which causes a backlash against Muslims, it's very hard for you to defend that. It's very hard for you to even sort of explain your own situation, and then you find yourself maybe in the back foot and maybe